Yeah.
Yeah, that's done. It's in progress.
Awesome. Thank you. And welcome everybody to the Istio community meetup. I'm glad to see many of you here today. And in order to get started, we are going to have a demo by Dennis Janot. Dennis, the floor is yours. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much. So let me share my screen at the same time. So yeah, I'm Denis Janot. I'm Director of Field Engineering at EMEA, in EMEA for Solo.io. And I'm going to speak about this multi-cluster pattern with Istio in particular. And I'm going to really focus a lot on demos. So I'm using some slide at the beginning to introduce the concept, but I will really do a lot of different small demos there so that it's more interactive. And feel free to interrupt me if you have any question, if anything is not clear. I'll be happy to clarify that. So let me just go in presenter mode. And now I will jump directly. So basically what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a lot of demo that we have in a workshop. And we are going to run this workshop again in the near future. So if you're interested, you'll be able to join. But the idea, I will jump directly in this part here, where I'm going to speak about the different way you can deploy Istio on multi-cluster. So obviously one way is what we call the shared cluster or shared control plane, sorry, where you have just one control plane and you have two Kubernetes clusters and you have pods running on the two clusters. This model, we don't see it used quite often because first of all, you need a flat network. And also if you have an outage on this cluster, then you lose your control plane and the other services will not work correctly anymore. And so the most popular way is for multi-cluster is really using this replicated control plane model, where you have different Kubernetes clusters and you deploy Istio control plane on both clusters. It can be 2, 3, 4 or more clusters. And then the advantage is obviously you don't need a flat network. If you have an outage on one cluster, it just impacts this specific cluster. But on the other side, it's a lot more complex to implement. And I will go through what are the common challenges there and the way we can handle them. So the most common challenges, and there are a few more, are about federated the trust and identity. And I'll go through that deeper in the next slides. And also how you allow the communication between the clusters, how you can also manage access control globally, how you can manage failover, these kind of things. So that's the topic I will cover, and I'll try to do, demonstrate some of these capabilities in the next slides. And what I'm going to use is a project that we have launched at Solo.io that's called ServiceMesh Hub. That as for the goal of ServiceMesh Hub is really to make it easier to manage Istio across multiple clusters. We started with Istio and we are extending the capability to other technologies like AppMesh and OSM, but definitely the big focus here is Istio. So I will not go deep here into how ServiceMesh Hub works because, as I said, I'll go through the demo and it should be quite clear in a few minutes. But as I said, I'm going to really go through the different challenges, and I'm going to start with this federated identity. So here you are probably all very familiar with the way identity works in Istio, but I'm going to go through that very quickly again. So you have CA certificates that is used by Istio so that it can sign the certificates for the different services that are running in the cluster. And that allow each service to have its own identity based on the service account that the pod is using each pod is using. And the beauty of Istio is that you can quite easily have encryption between the services using mutual TLS. And Istio is like handling the complexity, rotating the certificate, which is something that is really not straightforward to do if you don't have Istio. And when two services need to communicate together, they come with their own identity, like I described, based on the service account. But it's quite important to understand how it works. So each pod has like its identity in the form of a SPiffy ID. So the SPiffy is like a standard that means secure production identity framework for everyone that is used in Istio. And a SPiffy ID is in this kind of format, like SPiffy, trust domain, and workload identifier. And in Istio, a SPiffy ID is like SPiffy, the trust domain that you use when you deploy your Istio cluster, NS, the namespace of the service account used by the pods, SA, and the service account name. So that's like give you a unique SPiffy ID. And it's important to understand that because when you deploy Istio, by default, the trust domain is cluster.local. So when it comes to multi-cluster Istio, then that can become very challenging, because if you have multiple clusters, and let's say you have like pods on these different clusters that use the same service account name in the same namespace, then there is no way to differentiate these two pods. So when you want to tackle this multi-cluster Istio problem, or you want to deploy Istio on multi-cluster in the right way, the first thing you need to do is really to have like different trust domain on the different deployments. And that means that then like this pod running on one cluster has an identity that will be unique across all the clusters. As soon as obviously you have like different service account for the different pods. The next challenge after that is when these pods want to communicate with this pod here, and you want to have like a mutual TLS. Now they have their unique identity, but they are not able to validate that identity because, as I said before, the certificate used by this pod has been signed by the control plane here, while the certificate used by this pod has been signed by another control plane, and each control plane has its own CA certificate. So what we need is that we need a common identity. So we need like a common root cert. And then that's one of the first things that you get with ServiceMesh Hub, is that you have this concept of a virtual mesh. And when you create this virtual mesh, what ServiceMesh Hub will do is that it will create like a new intermediate certificate on each cluster. And it will sign this intermediate certificate with a common root cert. And then this intermediate certificate on each cluster will be replacing the CS cert that is used by Istio on each cluster. So at the end, you will have a certificate chain that looks like the certificate of the pods, the intermediate certificate, which is unique on each cluster, and a common root cert. And because we have a common root cert, now it will allow one service on one cluster to be able to validate the identity of a pod in another cluster. So that's what you get like when you create this virtual mesh. I already created the virtual mesh in the environment we will use for the demo, so I'm not going to focus there. And I'm going to go back to access control a little bit later as well. So the first thing I'm going to do here is really to do a quick demo about how I can now have this cross-cluster communication. And for that, I deployed like 2 clusters. Basically, in fact, I have 3 clusters because I have one cluster where I have Istio running here on the left, which is called cluster 1. Another one here called cluster 2, where I also have Istio. And another one that's called management, where I have ServiceMesh Hub. But this could run also on one of these clusters. I just put that in a separate cluster so that you see it's not mandatory. And as you can see, I deployed the Bookinfo demo application on both sites, on both clusters. The only difference is that the review service has only V1 and V2 in this cluster, while it has V1, V2, and V3 on this cluster. So as you probably know, I'm sure you're already familiar with the Bookinfo application. So here, if I send a request here, I will have just like no stars or black stars. And if I send a request here, it will be like no stars, black stars, and red stars. So if I jump on this demo environment here, and I'm trying to reach here this product page on the left. So it's just this one here. If I refresh this page, you see I just get like no stars or black stars, because obviously I send the request locally and I didn't configure any cross-cluster communication. Now, if I want to allow this cross-cluster communication, ServiceMesh Hub makes that easy with this abstraction called traffic policy. So in the traffic policy, what I will say is that when when there is a request sent to the review service on cluster 1, I want a traffic shift to happen where I send 75% of the request to the V3 service on cluster 2, 15% of the request in cluster 1 on V1, and 10% cluster 1 on V2. So you see, it's very simple way to define this cross-cluster communication. So if I just copy that and paste this in my terminal. Now, if I go back here and I refresh, most of the time I should get red stars. See, first I get red stars here, red star, black stars. I can get other stuff, but most of the time I will get the red stars because obviously the rule is like I get 75% of the time these red stars. So what's interesting is that it was very easy to set up, but behind the scene, ServiceMesh Hub has created a lot of different Istio objects that are needed for this communication to happen. So you have obviously a virtual service that looks very similar to the traffic policy I defined, where you see the different weights. But here you see the destination is like, there is no notion of this is the cluster because Istio is not aware, of this other cluster. But you have this host name that finished by cluster2.global, and .global is a special suffix that you use when you want to do cross-cluster communications. Then you need to have like a destination role that defines the different subsets that I use here. Then you need to have a service entry that tells Istio how to reach this service in the other site. And obviously here the address is the address of the Istio ingress gateway on the second site. Then on the second site, it creates an envoy filter that basically will track all the communication coming with cluster2.global and will replace this suffix by cluster.local. So that's the communication seems like a local communication. So everything then can happen normally with the local destination rule and so on. So again, the idea is really just that with a very simple abstraction, I can make this cross-cluster communication happening. And then with the ServiceMesh Hub UI, we can see the policies that we create, like this one. And you see here, like, the percentage of, the workload that is described in the policy. And we can see also like the workloads that are impacted. And that's an example for a traffic policy, but you can also create like, for example, here I allowed the review pods to talk to the rating pods, and you see I defined different traffic targets, and I can show you that in fact here. So I already created that before the demo, but you see you create, you have the traffic policy like I described before, but we have also another abstraction, which is called access policy, which is a kind of cluster aware authorization policy if you want. But here, instead of just using traditional service account selector and stuff like that, you can also set up some different clusters. So here, basically, I say I want the service account used by the booking for reviews pods on cluster 1 and the one on cluster 2 to be able to reach any rating service on any cluster. And that has been translated by the local authorization policies. And then if I go back to the UI here, it displays as well, based on the current workloads that we have on these clusters, these are like the current source pods and the target pods that they can reach based on this policy. And you can always also like go to this debug mode and see the corresponding authorization policies and service entries and destination rules and so on. But that just makes it easier with this higher abstraction that are cluster aware. So this example was really about showing you how you can do like cross-cluster communication. And another use case for that is if I want to manage failover. So let's say if I am not able to reach the local review service, I now want to reach the review service on the other side. So again, I'm going to jump on the demo and configure that. So the first thing I'm going to do is that I'm going to remove the traffic policy I just created here. And then I'm going to create a few objects. So one is a traffic policy that will define outlier detection. So I will be able to tell that I want basically to have this outlier detection. If I have like more than one error in 10 seconds, then I want to eject the target for like 2 minutes. And so I'm going to apply that here. And basically it will be translated. When I do that, it's translated in two different Istio objects. So one is like a destination rule here on cluster 1 and a destination rule on cluster 2 for the review service. And you see the outlier detection that is similar to what I just like defined in the traffic policy. And then the second step is to create a failover service so that we define, what are the services that are behind this new host name that we define. So it's kind of like defining a highly available host name. So if I want to reach the review service and I want to make sure that I will be able to reach the review service even if one of the backing service is not available, I will do that by creating this failover service. So let me just try to copy and paste that. And again, when I do that, basically what ServiceMesh does is that it will create an envoy filter so that it will replace the DNS name I specified here by the local and the remote cluster. And it will also create a service entry for this new host name so that it's known by the mesh. So I could just stop there and I could say, okay, now if I want to access this, then I would go to the product page service and I will modify my microservice here. I will modify my application. And instead of sending my request to reviews, I would send the request to reviews failover. And basically, the application will be aware that it's now targeting like an highly available service. But I can even make it transparent so that here I don't want to modify my product page service. I want this highly available service to be in place without changing anything in my app. And that's something I can do easily. I just need to configure another traffic policy where basically what I say is that when a request targets the review service, I send it to the reviews failover so that it becomes transparent. And so I'm going to just create that. And again, if you think about what it does in terms of Istio, it just like create a virtual service. And the virtual service is just like requests going to reviews are now sent to the highly available service. So to test it out, what I can do is I can just like make these review service on the local cluster. I can make them unavailable by just like adding a sleep command. So if I do that here, they are not now unavailable. But if I try to access my app here, that should still work. You see, it still works. I still get like, oops, just the time to make it happen. I can still see, I can still access my review service. And I have a way to prove it. In fact, is that if I go to, if I look at the logs in cluster 2, I should see requests coming. So that's just prove that the requests are really going through this second cluster. So here I am on the second cluster, and if I continue to refresh here, I should start to see here, I see more requests coming here. So again, it was really easy to set up the failover, and I'm also able, like it was the case before, I can go here and I can see what policies I have in place, and I can see the failover that I just configured here, and I can see the backing services for the different failover, and a few other things that I didn't describe before, but that are quite nice here. When I created the mesh, I enforced airbag globally. So it was like an option on the virtual mesh creation that I can show you here. So I created the virtual mesh before. Nope, it was just there. A little bit higher, I think. Yeah. So here you see the first time when I created the mesh in the demo, I didn't set the access control here, and I just did that to validate, the SPiffy ID and all these things. And then when we do the access control part, we just modify the virtual mesh so that we want airbag to be enabled globally. And when we do that, what Service MeshHub does is that it creates some rules like that, some authorization policy with an empty spec. That means that nothing is allowed, no communications are allowed. And currently my application is working because what I did is that I already created all my access policies here to allow like the ingress gateway to talk to the product page, then to allow the product page to talk to the details and reviews services. And then, so you see, constructing all these different things that are needed. And then allowing the reviews to speak with the rating service. But again, it was just the reviews on this site. So that was allowed, but still this one was not allowed for the global communication. That's why what I said before is when I did this traffic or multi-cluster traffic here, I had to create as well this access policy to specify that I also want the review on cluster 2 to be able to communicate with the rating service. So yeah, I mean, it was just like an overview of what you can do with ServiceMesh Hub and how it can really simplify multi-cluster communications. And I just kept some time for answering questions. So if you have any question, I'm happy to respond this question now.
Thank you so much, Dennis.
You're welcome.
And would you be able to pass me back the host rights so I can continue to?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay.
Any questions for Dennis? Matthew, are you in the call? Would you like to unmute? Is that possible for you?
Yeah, I was on mute.
Great.
Yeah, I had a question. I'm a novice at all about Istio. So I was looking into multi-cluster stuff, and I was wondering, there's Kiali, which offers like visualization of the traffic that's flowing, and also with traffic policies that split percentages of certain traffic to certain destination. Is there something like that as well in ServiceMesh Hub? Because there is a lot of information apparently in there about which services are backing which rules, and I was wondering if that is available as well.
Yeah, that's a very good question. So that's the next item in the list of what we are tackling. So we are adding some new stuff in ServiceMesh Hub. One thing that we are adding is like a global airbag, so that you can define, who can do what, who can create these access policies, who can create these traffic policies and stuff like that. And the other thing we are working on is a global, global telemetry or global metrics like you just described. So that's something we are working on, because currently you can have Kiali on your first cluster, Kiali on the second cluster, and you can use that to visualize the communication between services on the same cluster, but you cannot do that for multi-cluster. So we are working on having like a global telemetry, and that will be part of ServiceMesh Hub.
Hello, here's
oh, sorry.
oh,
Go
sorry.
ahead.
Here's Uli Roman from I'm with Box, and we're actually in an early evaluation and proof of concept stage with Istio. I have actually two questions, but I want to focus on the first one first, and then probably hold off on the second to give other people a chance to answer. So Istio is very opinionated about how it actually manages identity and certificates. And you actually now, of course, obviously, you kind of put that into MeshHub. How can we integrate with MeshHub when we have our own PKI infrastructure? Because we're not using, we don't use Citadel. We don't want to. I can't, because it's not technical limitation. It's more a policy and governance issue that we're highly regulated industry. So to give you some high level introduction, how we manage it. So we actually run a sidecar in every pod that retrieves the certificates, and then it puts it into Kubernetes secrets, and then those secrets get mounted in as a file system into the pod. And then our services access that through this. With Istio, it's very hard to manage that. It's possible, but it's pretty much a hack. So we don't let Istio generate the certificates. How can we do that with MeshHub?
So basically, the way it works is that like if you look at without MeshHub, you would get something like that. You would have like and I described that here. Basically, you would have like a cert chain. I think I have an example here. You would have a cert chain. I don't have the example before, but basically you would have like the certificate that correspond to the pods, and then you will have the CS cert that is used by Istio on the cluster to sign the certificate, and you can change that CS cert if you want to. But when you create the virtual mesh, then we add another layer, which is this root certificate. And the root certificate is used to sign the intermediate certificate that is different on each cluster. And then the intermediate certificate is used to sign the pod certificates. And if you create the virtual mesh like I did, then the root cert is generated. But you can also provide your own root cert that comes from your PKI, basically. And then that means that all the certificates will be trusted by your environment. I don't know if it exactly answered the question.
Yeah, it answers the question. So that works nicely if you're only running in Kubernetes, but we also have a ton of legacy services that run outside, and we need to do MTLS with them as well. And
that's
so,
fine. So that's fine.
Yes, it works, but it's kind of a hack. So yeah,
I mean,
you answered my question with something that I already figured out myself, but I thought there would be a more elegant, easier way, but that's okay.
I mean, it's a hack, but it's not really becoming a hack. I mean, like the support is becoming better and better,
right?
And it works. I mean, it's not straightforward, but when you put the process in place, it works.
Right.
And in 1.8, you have a lot of new stuff coming as well, like on the DNS side and so on, that will make your life even easier.
And we're currently working on integrating with Cert Manager, which then would make our life much easier because we manage our certificates in Vault anyway. So, all right, I think I'll yield anytime. I had the second question, but I'll give it up to other people.
Yeah, if you want to continue the discussion, I would be happy to continue that. You can reach to me on LinkedIn or even on our Slack, in solo Slack channel. You have like a ServiceMesh Hub channel in our Slack. So
okay, I will definitely do that.
I have a quick question if there is still time. This is Vicente from Zendesk. And since you touched on the trust domain, this is an issue that I'm currently investigating. So I have a sandbox cluster here. It's running 173 with the default trust domain. And as soon as I replace that by whatever name I want, everything, all the MTLS intra-cluster breaks. If I add the trust alias cluster.local, then I restore the functionality. But even after I restart Istio, I restart all the sidecars. If I leave only the new trust domain, it breaks everything. So is there any trick, or do I need to keep the trust alias forever?
There is a trick that we show in our workshop. Basically, the way you deploy that, you have to, where is that? Here, that's the trick. So that's basically you tell it to to skip.
You don't share yet.
Yeah, I'm not seeing your screen.
Oh yeah, you're right. Yeah, sorry. Let me just put that in the chat.
Appreciate, man.
Or you can just, as I say, you can also reach to me, but I put in the chat. But yeah, there is a trick for that. We took time to figure that out as well, but that's the way you do it. So that's the way you deploy Istio. You just deploy it that way, so that it skip that. And basically, you don't need to validate the trust domain because you have this common identity. So in any case, you can really trust the identity of the other components because you are able to validate the certificates and stuff like that.
I see. I appreciate that. Yeah, I'll try it out.
Sure, and just reach to me if you have any issue.
Sure. Thanks.
And just like a quick advertising, we are doing another workshop on the ServiceMesh Hub, like the 23rd of November. I think it will be like European friendly time, but if some of you are in Europe, that will be easy. Otherwise, we will do other workshop in US friendly time as well soon. So I hope it was useful for you guys.
And do you have information for about this web? Did you say it was a webinar or a workshop?
It's a workshop, so I can just like put that in the chat as well.
Yeah,
I'll put the link so that if anyone is interested, we still have some seats available, I think so. and as I said, like it's the next one, but we will have others coming as well. So.
And any other questions for Tennis?
I had perhaps another one. I got here actually because on GitHub, one issue mentioned that in Istio 1.8, there was going to be some changes about how they recommend multi-cluster setup. I was wondering if that is going to break something, or if ServiceMesh Hub will already work with the new release, which is, I think, planned to come out mid-November.
Yeah, no, we are already starting to work on that. We always like kind of validate with the beta before, and obviously we are tracking that. I didn't look by myself. I don't think like there are really huge breaking changes. I think the big change is really on the DNS side. So obviously it will basically it will make our life easier more than anything else, even on the ServiceMesh Hub side. But one of the advantage as well of ServiceMesh Hub is that it will take care of the complexity of like going from 1.7 to 1.8. And that's something we will handle on our side for the multi-cluster things. Instead of you having to do it in one way in 1.7 and then in another way in 1.8, for example. So that's also one of the idea of ServiceMesh Hub is to make it easier for people who want to adopt multi-cluster to then also maintain it in the long term. Good. Thank you very much. Thanks for inviting us in this talk. And
Yes.
I'm going to jump now because it starts to be late here and I have like a dinner coming soon. But, was a pleasure.
Thank you for presenting a demo. So we have one more item on the agenda for today's meetup. And it's about sessions for KubeCon North America. I was wondering if anyone has submitted a session, or if you want to discuss that. Unfortunately, we don't have the feature to break people into rooms, but that's ideally what we would be doing at this point. But I thought that topic might be interesting to discuss in this group. Has anybody submitted a session about Istio for KubeCon North America?
I have for ServiceMesh Con, which is the co-located event.
Mm-hmm. Nice, awesome. What is it about, Lynn? Do you want to share a link here?
Yeah, I can dig through a link. It's about Istio simplified beyond single cluster. So it's basically give an update on the community work we've been doing, multi-clusters in 1.8, and also the simplification on virtual machines.
Awesome, great. If you can share a link, we can make sure to promote it on the Istio Twitter handle.
Yes. Do you want me to share the link on the chat here?
Yes.
Okay.
So I've added a link to the chat to the whole schedule for ServiceMesh Con. I think we have 3 talks that are going to feature Istio. So, and they look like most of them happen around 3 p.m. to 5 p.m.
Yeah,
Great.
thank you, Mitch. I think you have one along with LinkedIn and some other ServiceMesh too, right?
Yeah, we have a really fun talk that's a collaboration between Linkerd, Consul, and Istio that focuses on how our architectural choices impact our users.
Yeah. By the way, your link is for the Europe. I think the one I sent was for North America.
Oops, thank you.
That's okay. It took me a while to find the link too.
Mitch, if you can share the link to your talk, that would be awesome too.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's that general schedule. You just find out talk. So there's actually a lot of talk about Istio. Like for instance, there is confident canary deployment. So that's Istio talk. Like Shuram, actually not sure if Shuram is speaking now that he left Tetra. So there's a talk about multi-cluster deployment, practical guide from Tetra. I would be thinking that's probably Istio. And also there's a talk about Department of Defense use Istio to do end-to-end encryption from Zach and Platform One, Jeff. So that's a Istio talk also. And Christian, I think he is going to talk about ServiceMesh a step further with WebAssembly. Istio might be highlight there too. Yeah, so it's probably 50% of the talk will be Istio related.
Yeah, I think I heard that at the Istio steering committee as well. I was just curious to see if people here in this community meetup had submitted talks. Yeah, so that's what I was going for. But Mitch, when you have the link to your talk, I would love to add it to our schedule for social media as well. Great. So I wanted to share with you all that I am creating a topic on Istio Discuss forum, Discuss Istio, to request demos. And I just wanted to extend this invitation to all of you here now. If you have an idea for a demo, something that you would like to present, thank you, Mitch. Please reach out to us, and we would love to have you present at the next meetup. I am pasting some of the guidelines on what demos we are looking for. Okay, give me 1 second. I need to put this here. Okay. And as always, I would love to have your support in spreading the word about this. So if you see, even if you don't have something yourself that you would like to present on, but you see that somebody's working on something that is really cool, encourage them to submit a demo idea on this thread that I'm going to share in a minute here. These demos are going to, like this recording, what we do afterwards, we upload this to the Istio YouTube channel, and we trim the demo, and we're going to make a playlist of demos. So it's always a good resource to have to show how Istio works. And this is the place where you can point people or add your own demos as well. I just share that on the chat box. So if you're able to share that, that would be really cool. If you within your community, or if you're on Twitter, feel free to share this more broadly so that more people hear about this. Are there any other topics that you all would like to discuss in the community meetup? We shared the agenda in advance, but there were no new topics added. So I'm just curious if anybody has anything that you would like to talk with the group. Now would be the time. Okay, cool. So it sounds like we are good for today. Thank you everybody for showing up. I wanted to give you a heads up that the next meetup is going to be aligned with KubeCon North America. So it's going to take place a week earlier than usual. As you may have noticed, we moved the community meetups to take place on once a month instead of twice a month. So I hope to see many of you there. The next community meetup, we expect to attract more of the KubeCon North America participants. So there may be new people around. And I hope that you all can still show up and make everybody else feel comfortable as well and feel welcome to the Istio community. And I think without any further ado, I will give you a few more minutes back to your day. Thank you for coming.